Welcome to the Herland report, Erik Selle. You are a Scandinavian, a Norwegian and an international person who is the founder and president of the Africa-Israel Initiative. You've been working, I think you have worked in 17 African countries, and me personally, I was born and raised in Africa, so Africa is a very wonderful and dear continent to me. There's nowhere in the world where I find peace the same way I do in my African homeland. Can you please explain a little bit about your work in Africa?
Yeah, well, I used to work related to Israel for many years, from 2000 and up to 2011. And in the summer of 2011, there was an African pastor that called me. I was in Israel at the time. He said, I need to meet you. And make a long story short, I met him, and he invited me to come to Africa to teach on biblical principles from the Word of God when it comes to the Jewish people and to Israel. And from there, there's a verse in the Bible in the prophet Zechariah, verse 8:13, where it says, you house of Judah and you house of Israel, that were cursed among the nations, I will make you a blessing. Now, that's, whether you're religious or not, that's a profound scripture, because today you can see in this tiny little nation, if you read Saul Singer's eminent book, Startup Nation, you will see how innovative the Jewish people is, how innovative the people of Israel is, how they give us new breakthroughs in medicine, science, high tech, practical stuff like cheaper way to build roads, how they develop agriculture, cows gives more milk, you utilize the water, drip it down on each seed, and you know it's amazing. And all of these things, Africa is in a position that Africa has never been before. I believe this is the time for Africa. There's always, through history, centuries, you've seen empires come and go. You have seen different cultures rise and different cultures fall. And I believe this is the time for Africa. I see indicators in Africa today that makes me very hopeful for this continent, probably the richest continent in the world from the Creator's hand. And if they get get good leaders, if they can deal with corruption, because it's been their own value. We see, I was in Nigeria last week, and 24 hours on Nigerian television, in the newspapers, was we have to deal with corruption. Anti-corruption in Africa is not now a foreign idea. It comes from their own hearts. Sub-Saharan Africa has been transformed by revivals and Christianity. We meet now devout Christians in President's office, in the Parliament House, speakers of the Parliament, and they have embraced the biblical values as their own. It's not a foreign religion. Christianity has become an African religion. And the way Christianity transformed Europe from feudalism and a terrible continent, basically, until revival touched the heart of the fabric of society. That has happened in Africa. And so Christianity is not anymore a Western religion. It's an African religion. And the church in Africa is extremely strong. And we decided that we want to use our network, connect Africa and Israel. Israel, you know, they know they're hated people. Israel is demonized in the UN. You can go to UN Watch, read Hillel Neuer on YouTube, read what's going on. And Africa are natural friends for Israel today. And Paul Kagame, president of Rwanda, great president, beautiful nation. He was invited to APAC to speak about Rwandan's policy of supporting Israel.
It's a paradox, isn't it, that we see a de-Christianization in Europe and a Christianophobia, some say. Yeah. Patriarch Kirill of Russia has repeatedly spoken about that, how Islam is very much more tolerated and other religions are much more tolerated in Europe. But if somebody wears a cross, which is why I wear my Bethlehem cross today, my Palestinian Bethlehem cross bought in Bethlehem, in support of the Palestinian Christians and the Christians of the Middle East. Of course, that's an issue which engages me very much. I speak to a number of activists pertaining to that because we want to create an awareness in the West pertaining to the sufferings of the minorities in the Middle East. But it's a paradox that in the European countries we have elites, very much on the contrary of what the European people at large maybe want. In Europe, over 80% actually state that they believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And even in an antagonistic country such as Norway, we have over 70% of the people, according to ISSP 2008, who state that they believe in a God and in a world hereafter. So I mean, there seems to be a split in Europe and in the West between what the people feel and what the European elites feel. And maybe this is also one of the reasons why we see in the US the choice of Donald Trump, the people's choice. Well, it remains to be seen whether he will be able to do something really that, that breakthrough in the U.S. as he wishes to. But nonetheless, the people voted for him, and in the same way we see Brexit, we see Marine Le Pen in France speaking about the nation state, and there's a whole surge among the people. They want something else than the current, I would say, pretty much anti-Christian, anti-traditionalist European elites. And in such a way, it's a paradox when you look at Africa, like you mentioned, because Africa is such an interesting and vibrant place, also the Sahara, with complete whole nations, with Christians, as you say, and such a pride in the faith. And Africa is growing. I mean, they have an annual growth rate, which it's much... really big, both in Uganda and in Kenya. Kenya is an excellent country under now President Uhuru Kenyatta.
Yeah, 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa. It's actually called the Jerusalem Cross because Jerusalem is the center and 4 corners of the earth. It's also Christ and the 4 Gospels. So it's a wonderful jewelry you have. But I think you're correct that in Europe today there's a very strong anti-Christian sentiment within the media establishment, within the elites. And I think maybe it's part of the anti-Russian sentiments that is in the West. Russia today is not Soviet Union, and Vladimir Putin is not Joseph Stalin. And Russia has tried to find every society needs to build on an ideological platform. You cannot build a society in an ideological vacuum. And when Soviet Union fell, they had a number of years, big turmoil, oligarchs taking over, and Putin came along, and in a way he has saved Russia, because he saved Russia from anarchy. So he's, of course, he's a tough ruler and all of that stuff, but also he has reorientated the Russian identity back to the Christian roots of the Russian Orthodox Church. And I have great respect for the Russian Orthodox Church, and I believe that some of the critics of Putin is correct, as well as some of the critics against the Norwegian children welfare system is correct. But it's not illogical anymore. It's not intellectual anymore. He has taken Russia to give the Russian Orthodox a place because Russia needs to build on some roots. And I think the anti-Christianity that we find too strong in Western Europe today is also spilling over to how they look at Putin.
Yes, I do believe so. And when you look at Russia, for example, it's now a nation that one can state is really... I mean, they went from being an atheist nation to now having over 70% are Russian Orthodox Christians in that nation. So it's a nation that tries to incorporate some of the historically Russian values. As you so well stated, we see how President Putin travels almost annually to Mount Athos in Greece, and really is an anti-globalist for one. That's another issue with Putin. Secondly, he's a realist, which I think we do need rather than what we see in the Western structures, or what we have seen in the Western structures, as NATO has gone from being a transatlantic defense organization to being more of an aggressive US-led, one may say, global force. I mean, there's elements here that have been problematic pertaining to the anti-Christian or much anti-Christian and anti-traditionalist Western elites who have so strongly in the US also called for the abolishment of the Christian values and implementation of a pure, one may say, materialism. We also have a hedonism and a nihilist way of thinking that I do believe is about to create big cultural problems in the West. Pat Buchanan, the previous presidential elect or not elect, but candidate in the US, has written much about this and so many others. And there's such a worrying tendency among the intellectual elites also in Europe, because one sees that there's something fundamentally wrong when you remove, probably you may say not religion, but when you remove the ethical foundation of a society, you do find that things do disintegrate. And this is why also it's interesting in Africa, and it's interesting with other nations such as Israel and also the Far East. I mean, the geopolitical shift to the Far East is remarkable, and I do believe in Israel as well that they're preparing for the shift away from the United States and more. I mean, we've seen Netanyahu also visit Putin a number of times, especially during the Obama years. I think there could be changes towards center in more towards the East. What do you think about that?
Well, I think if we are stuck in the Cold War paradigm, you will not be able to navigate in today's reality. In the Cold War, it was easy. We're the good guys, they're the bad guys. And everything went through those lines. So even if you had bad guys siding with the good guys, you would accept them and you would demonize the bad guys being with the bad guys, kind of. Now there's no good guys and bad guys. People make mistakes on all sides of the aisle, and there are good sides. There's definitely a lot of good things in Russia, and I hope really for Norway's sake, which is where I live, that I want a good dialogue with Russia and understand their point of view and their perspectives, and we always had a good neighbor relationship with them. At the same time, we live in a volatile world. We need to build up the national security, national defense forces, anti-terror capacities in Norway. But I believe that good fences, clear fences, creates good neighborhoods, because you know where they are. I think when it comes to the Middle East, Israel has obviously needed to expand their network, so to say, because President Obama represented something new in America. I tend to call him the first, maybe anti-American president. Sort of, at least he brought a new element to what he thought and believed to be America. His biggest and gravest error in judgment was supporting the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. I have great respect for President al-Sisi and what he has done in Egypt, how he labeled the Brotherhood as terrorists. I have great respect for how al-Sisi is trying in a very tough nation to protect the Christians, for example, the Copts. And Netanyahu went to Putin because Putin is a friend of Israel. Putin is a friend of the Jewish people. And that is something that Netanyahu and Israel did not perceive Obama as. And Putin has Russia has said that they acknowledge at least Western Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, which is unprecedented now. So it's not very, especially if you're aware of the history against the Jews and you're concerned about the Jewish issue, suddenly Putin comes up as a player. And when it comes to Christianity in the Middle East, it's being eradicated. It's the Jews was kicked out, and now the Christians are being smashed. And suddenly Putin seems to be a stabilizing factor against ISIS and these. When there was the war in Aleppo, every single day, morning, day and night. There were pictures on Norwegian television about how terrible the Russian fighting against Aleppo was. Well, when this fighting ceased, some called it the fall of Aleppo, and some called it the liberation of Aleppo. What I know is that the following Sunday, for the first time in 5 years, the church bell rang in Aleppo and the Christians could meet for Mass and for service again. So things are not so easy. And if you just follow mainstream media in the Western world, you are doomed to have no clue about what's going on.
This is partly, I do believe, because the Western media is owned. The very few own almost everything. I mean, over 90% of the American media is owned by 6 corporations, and they're all in each other's boards and all of that. So this is why, of course, the brilliant Noam Chomsky long has pointed out that the US is no longer a democracy, in the sense that there's an oligarchy and a few who rule the nation, and great lobbies. Then, you know, I mean, and we've seen it with the Clinton Foundation, for example, being funded by the Al Thani, Qatari families and the Saudis, and also the Norwegian government has been heavily into that. Of course, I do believe in Norway, could be called the Qatari of Europe. We use our oil money to buy influence into leading positions, and we've seen how this has worked excellently as we have bought our way into the international community. We have General Secretary of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, whom in his younger years was against NATO. Now this was all of a sudden erased from his Wikipedia profile once he became the General Secretary. We have also several other Norwegians in leading positions now, and so this points to there's something corrupt also going on clearly in the Norwegian government as we're funding these organizations and then being given as a consequence, one may say, a bit rude here, but then we're given these wonderful positions in international waters. So regarding that, there's a question of whether oil money should be spent in a political system pertaining to that. But back to Israel, actually, it's and the Eastern Shift. I spoke to a billionaire and a startup founder, a very good friend of Singer, a couple of years ago in an interview, Jonathan Medved, and he's one of those who's really pushing for the startup businesses and funding a lot of the young Israelis doing very much interesting work. And what he said is that forget Europe. Well, he wasn't really saying that. You can listen to the interview and hear what he actually said. But the point was really, I mean, if Europe wants to boycott everything from Israel, let them do so. He said that Israel now is trading more with Arab countries, the nearby Arab countries, than what they're doing with Europe. So this is also some of the sentiment you find here in Scandinavia when you speak to the Israeli embassy, for example. They're not really that interested in us anymore. They say, if you want to boycott all our stuff, no problem, we're going to the East. So there's something we don't quite understand pertaining to that. And much can be said about Israel. I would like to say I don't so much enjoy seeing them bombing close to Palmyra and the engagement that is on the Golan Heights with some of what's going on there. I don't particularly like, but I would say one of Muammar Gaddafi's close friends told me the other day, because I asked him about Israel and the question of that. He said that Muammar Gaddafi always said that the Jews are an intricate fabric of the Middle Eastern society. They've been there for several thousand years. There's no question about it. So the question for the Muslim countries is then more, or the Arab countries also, is more how to cooperate, because I think the Jews are very strong. I spoke to a Syrian, a great businessman the other day also. He also said that, well, much can be said about the Jews, but I do respect them, he said, because they really get it on. They know how to do business in this region. They know how to enrich their country. They know how to cooperate in business. So there's also positive things about Israel that maybe some of the Arab countries should remember and should embrace, so that there can be cooperation between the groups.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't call Chomsky brilliant from my point of view, but I think to pick up on your first points, America still has a great advantage. They have voices in the media from the grassroots, like Dennis Prager, Coast to Coast Network Radio. You know, they have local radio stations. They made Coast to Coast networks. In America today, even you have CNN, obviously, they are doing Arab commercials since 20 years. They bought up a Qatari, Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump was correct, you know, on his message in these relations. But in America, you still have voices of independence and freedom. You just can't connect with the big networks. But America is big enough, and there are channels enough to hear the other voices. I'm much more worried about Europe. Because Europe is much more, first of all, they're arrogant towards the Americans and basically everybody else. But in Europe, when I travel the world and I get back to Europe, I feel, you know, it's really, really tight, narrow space.
I agree.
And
agree.
And the media voice is so one-sided. And it's not that, I don't think maybe it's the ownership, but in Europe, in Norway, I think if you're a journalist and you want a successful career, you have to keep your options open. So there's no media houses doing investigating journalism on the other journalists, because they're all aspiring in the same career ladder, you know. So I'm much more worried about Europe. When it comes to Israel, Israel is a great democracy. It's a great democracy in a sea of totalitarian states. There's chaos
and it's
all
a
around.
Multicultural state
And it's
as
multicultural.
well. Many say it's an apartheid state, but when you go to Israel, you see that, I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of Arabs living in Israel, also being citizens. You have high judges, high court judges. I mean, you have all kinds of, it's really spread out. So there's some of that, you may say, critique against Israel, I think should be placed on Europe, because I think we're much more apartheid here. We're much more aware of the skin color of different people. And this is also partly due to our history, because we've been very mono, you may say, the ethnicities in Scandinavia, for example. So there's many issues that could have been addressed here. But what I would like to address is what you spoke briefly about, and that's the degree of propaganda in the, let's say, the Scandinavia. We live in Scandinavia, I live in the Middle East, but I am Scandinavian. The degree of propaganda in Scandinavia is appalling, and very many in the world do not know about this, because we're chronically told that we're the richest in the world, Well, let me tell you, there's not only money that defines how rich you are in the world. And it's not only, I mean, it's easy for Norway to come up on those scales, because they take the BNP divided by how many people live in this country and add the degree of social welfare functions. And obviously Norway is at the top there, and you don't really need to work here. There's social welfare for everything, which is a system that's dying anyway, so we're not going to be able to uphold that system at any rate. But it's a problem in the media here that everybody speaks with the same voice, and there's a censorship also within the university systems that very many are not aware of. We know the most excellent Milo Yiannopoulos. I'm such a fan of his. But Milo Yiannopoulos has of course experienced this to a gross extent in the United States as well also. Being expelled from universities, told he's a racist, he's a homophobe, he's whatever. You know, all these slandering names constantly placed on people who say something a little bit different from the ideological standpoint of those who are the European and the American elites at the moment. So I do agree with you that one of the main problems in Europe is the censorship within the media, because these places were like under an iron wall. Remember how we used to say about the Russians that they were behind they were iron curtain. We are now under another iron curtain, and this makes Europeans believe a lot of things that actually do not coincide with reality. So this is also why I support President Putin. I think that we are highly biased against Russia, and I think that we should not be so ideologically oriented in Europe and in the West, but we should rather take a stronger stance for a realism and a stance for the respect of national borders and the respect for international law. I think that would end some of the wars we also see in the Middle East and some of the crises of our day. So thank you very much, Erik Selle, for being with us, and thank you for taking the time to join us here in Herland Report.
Thank you.